and move back to the top of our agenda to start taking public testimony on House Bill 1211, starting with an in-person panel. If we can bring up Sharon Hewling, Mary Dispenza, and Chris Dormer. And then on deck in the remote, if we can have Jean Hill and Bishop Frank Schuster, please. And with that, who would like to lead us off?
You can start.
Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee. I'm Mary Dispenza, SNAP contact for Washington. When I was 18, a young nun, I confessed that I was raped by the parish priest at age 7. The priest went on for 4 more decades to assault little girls. Why? Because he could. The seal of confession protected him. For every assault of a child reported in the confessional, there is an undisclosed predator preying upon children. Confession shields 2 criminals, the perpetrator and the confessor, who really has become an accomplice by not reporting. To call this kind of secrecy a privilege is ludicrous. It is a crime. The responsibility to report crimes against children belongs to all of us, in or outside of the confessional. We are all mandated reporters when it comes to crimes against children. It is vital that Washington State preserve the rule of law when it appears to be diminishing at the federal level. As lawmakers, it is your duty and mine and privilege to keep children safe. Child abuse is epidemic. Priests must report. Thank you for voting yes on HB 1211.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you for allowing me to speak. My name is Chris Dormeyer from the Clergy Accountability Coalition. I respectfully ask you to vote for HB 1211, and this is why. I'm a mother of 3 and a grandmother of 11. I'm here to support our children. There is so much abuse happening in the world. If we could close the gap on this one issue, it would be a huge step in the right direction. I do not speak to just Catholic clergy, but to clergy of other faiths that also think they are above the law. This bill is for the safety of our children. It only applies to someone who is abusing a child. There should be no leniency for them. What would Jesus do is a foundational question every Christian must answer, but it is a universal question. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me." I think Jesus meant that he would always be a safe place for children. Truth is, the confessional has not always been a safe place for children. Often their abuser priest was free to harm him or her again. The seal of confession protected him, not the child. Currently, the Catholic Church in Washington State is refusing to cooperate with an investigation to reveal the files of those priests who have raped children. This institutional secrecy harms our children. Let's stop it now. Vote yes on HB 1211. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
My name's Sharon Hewling. I'm testifying on behalf of the Clergy Accountability Coalition. In his letter to members of this committee in 2023, Bishop Schuster wrote, "Any attempt to harm the privacy and confidentiality of this sacrament, confession, would harm the very souls that public servants, priests, vow to protect. On behalf of victims, we are asking the bishop and the church, whose souls do you wish to protect? Pedophiles or children? I'm Catholic. The law does not attack confession. The sanctity of confession is not its privacy. In fact, it became private in the 13th century, in part to cover up sex scandals involving priests. Knowledge that priests were sexually assaulting minors during confession is documented as early as 1561. My church has fought for far too long to protect the privilege to remain silent. It is no longer acceptable that they have the solution. The Pope can change canon law. Good priests do not need to be excommunicated for reporting child sex abuse. How, and if a priest does, how would they know? State law protects the identity of reporters. The church has not provided us with one example of where this has happened. To be clear, the only people who need to worry about the privacy of their confession are child rapists and abusers. This issue is controversial. The ethics that apply are not. You can change state law and lift the cloak of secrecy that has fueled this epidemic of abuse.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any questions of our panel? Thank you for being here. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Our next panel is going to be online. If we can get Jean Hill to unmute, and on deck will be Bishop Frank Schuster. Jean, whenever you are ready, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Representative Cortez. Thank you, Chair Berquist and committee members. Jean Hill with the Washington State Catholic Conference. I want to be very clear, we support mandatory reporting. We ask simply that this bill follow the majority of states, which also protect the sacrament of confession. While 28 states require clergy reporting, there are only 6 that take the extreme position of denying the clergy penitent privilege. By stripping away the clergy privilege while still protecting the attorney-client privilege, the state essentially says that only those who can pay for a privilege are allowed to speak freely with a trusted advisor despite constitutional protections. Much of the debate is focused on actions occurring in the Catholic Church in the 50s through the 70s before any mandatory reporting laws. I ask you today to recognize the mandatory reporting and other changes in church policies that have been implemented based on our experience with the scandal of abuse, and include an exemption for confidential communications. Doing so recognizes that priests today know how to move conversations about abuse out of the confessional and into a reportable context, and recognizes that discouraging parishioners from talking with their priests is likely to result in abuse continuing, including young victims who may go in thinking they've done something wrong and will never learn that they're not to blame because they're afraid to confess to the priest. I also want to clarify that the AG investigation referred to was not an investigation of abuse. It was a subpoena for receipts and was quashed by the King County Superior Court. While it suggested the Catholic Church is the obstacle to this bill, we are simply asking for a compromise consistent with that made in 22 other states to exempt the confessional. Please leave confidential communication between clergy and parishioners as protected as that between attorneys and clients, both of which have constitutional protection and only one of which the bill tramples. Thank you.
Thank you. Looks like Representative Burnett has a question.
Thank you, Chair. Just a clarifying question. You made the statement of only 6 deny, and you were talking fast, so I didn't quite hear that.
Sorry.
Could you repeat that, please? Thank you.
There's only 6 states that don't have a privilege for clergy in their reporting statutes. 6 of the states that require clergy to report, there's only, of all the states that require clergy to report, only 6 refuse to have a clergy penitent privilege exemption.
We have another question. Representative Hill?
Yes, my question is around the statement around that most of the sexual abuse scandals were in the, I think you said the 50s, 60s. Being from Spokane and having recently heard, I believe, from looking it up, 2024, we had a whole, if you could speak to, if you have knowledge around this more recent scandal where my understanding is Catholic priests were being put in Spokane around Gonzaga University, which there's a St. Al's K through 12 right across the street in that neighborhood. And that there was an attorney general action that was brought in 2024 because charitable funds were being used to hide sexual abuse allegations. So can you speak to, given your statement that this is happening, has happened more in the past, to these recent, very prolific statewide Spokane specific sexual abuse scandal that happened here
Well,
in
I would have to ask,
last
I'm
few
not
years?
familiar with the Spokane scandal. So I don't know if those were priests who had abused prior and were now being brought forward. I will say again, though, the AG's action was not about abuse that was happening. It was looking at receipts, that he wanted receipts from the archdiocese because it was his thought that they were misusing funds to clear up the abuse cases. And that, again, that subpoena was quashed by the court. So there is no ongoing investigation from the AG's office.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we're going to have Bishop Frank Schuster, and if you could please have David Wolf, D. Wolf on deck, please. And Bishop Frank Schuster, whenever you're ready, please unmute and go ahead.
Thank you, Representative Berquist. My name is Bishop Frank Schuster, one of 5 bishops who shepherd over 1 million Catholics in Washington State. Although the church opposes HB 1211, we agree with the spirit of it. I'm grateful to the victim survivors who courageously share their story. The church failed them. The sex abuse scandal that came to light in 2001 was an earthquake in our history. However, our zero tolerance policy and safe environment programs enacted later in 2001 have made the church a leader. 20 years later, other organizations, including our public schools, can learn from us if you look at the data. All employees, volunteers, and priests are trained in safe environment and are mandatory reporters. The only exception is the sacrament of reconciliation, also known as the rite of penance. The seal of confession is inviolable. The priest cannot and will not break it. The consequence worldwide is excommunication and cannot change locally. This bill makes children less safe and not more safe. This bill will likely result in priests only hearing confessions anonymously behind a screen with no face-to-face option, which prevents us from being able to identify kids who are in trouble or for an abuser to see how serious we are with the expectation that they turn themselves in. It makes it difficult for us to schedule an appointment outside the confessional where the priest then becomes a mandatory reporter. This bill will also have a chilling effect on the tens of thousands of Catholics in Washington state who want to confess their sins without worrying that their sins will be reported due to a misunderstanding. We agree with the spirit of the bill, however, and want to be partners in revising the bill so it does not violate our parishioners' constitutional freedom of religion. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We're going to have David up next, but if we could please also ask Lily Chung, Carson Suyatsugu, and Annalise Orozco to please come up to the desk. And David, whenever you're ready, please unmute and go ahead.
Thank you, Chairman Berquist, members of the committee. For the record, I'm David DeWolf, Professor Emeritus at Gonzaga Law School. I've submitted a written statement with more detail, but here's a summary of my testimony. HB 1211 is not only bad public policy, it's unconstitutional. Let me explain. HB 1211 will not prevent child abuse. The means chosen in this bill, removing clergy and clergy alone from the list of those who may honor privileged communication, would no more prevent child abuse than requiring lawyers to report their clients if they admitted acts of child abuse or any other crime. The reasons for protecting the attorney-client privilege are spelled out in my written testimony, in which I cite the case of Douglas Schaefer, who was suspended from the practice of law for 6 months for revealing client confidences, even though his object, preventing judicial corruption, was a noble one. Just as the legal profession reacted harshly to his breach of the promise to his clients, there is no reason to believe that clergy will bend to a statutory command and become mandatory reporters of wrongdoing when knowledge of such wrongdoing was obtained in a confidential setting. The similarity between clergy and other professionals who obtain confidential communication reveals the constitutional infirmity of HB 1211. RCW 5.60.060 recognizes privileged communication in other contexts, and by singling out clergy for exclusion from this list, adoption of HB 1211 would violate both state and federal constitutions, just as in the Sprague case cited in my written testimony. Because HB 1211 is both bad public policy and likely to be found unconstitutional, I urge a no vote. Thank you for the opportunity to testify. I would happily answer any questions.
Thank you. It looks like we do have a question. Representative Hill.
Similarly, I'm curious if you're also familiar with the prosecution and what happened over in Spokane. Just looking at this, Gonzaga was actually deemed the retirement community for retired priests who had committed sex offenses. So I'm just curious, I'm trying to gauge who has some information of what's been going on in Spokane as a place where folks who are being put, who have confessed to child sex crimes. And this is related to the AG's investigation and prosecution for using charitable funds to, I don't know if it was settlements that were paid out or cover up funds for sexual abuse scandals, and the number of priests that were housed in Spokane near Gonzaga and near a K-12 school.
The cases in Spokane involve decades ago, incidents of child abuse. There's no question that what was done was illegal, and the question that arose was whether or not men in that situation should be housed at a place like Gonzaga University. It has nothing to do with the question of whether a current priest listening to a confession in which child abuse is admitted, whether that clergy should report that to the legal authorities in the same way that an attorney might be forced to report what his client says to him when he's defending that client in a criminal case.
Looks like we might have a follow-up, Representative Hill.
Yes, I keep hearing the statement that this was decades old, and I'm looking at reports that show incidents happening all the way through mid 2000, like up to like 2007, 8, 9, 10. So in terms of saying that these things are decades old, I'm not sure if we're looking at the same information there. And so I guess the follow-up is, are you familiar with the fact that there are more recent cases?
I think all of the recent cases stem from the very long statute of limitations that applies to child sexual abuse, and the fact that a case that occurred decades ago may still be brought today, even though the abuse occurred decades ago.
Thank you. Okay. I think we're going to move on to our in-person testifiers. And welcome. Go ahead, whoever's ready.
Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you so much for your time today and hearing us testify for HB 1211. I'm Annalise Roscoe, a high school student from Lake Washington High School. As a member of the Catholic Church myself, I feel that the voices, wants, and well-beings of parishioners and churchgoers are extremely important. When I attend Mass every Sunday, I expect to come to a place of peace, safety, belonging, and emotional comfort. However, not all parishioners are granted that privilege, especially the children that are suffering abuse in the confines of their own home. We already know that those in healthcare professions, law enforcement, social work, children work, and education are all mandatory reporters. Priests, pastors, and clergy members should be held to that same standard as they are vital members of a community. If more individuals hold responsibility as mandatory reporters in these safe and sacred spaces, it ensures that children have a legitimate outlet to neglect and a sanctuary space. The passing of HB 1211 is vital and addresses a solution to an incredibly deep and moral issue that affects not just children of the church, but all members of society. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon. Good afternoon, committee members. I'm Carson Sugu, a senior from Lake Washington High School. Today, I'll be advocating for the passage of Bill 1211. As a Christian myself, I've been lucky enough to have never been put in a situation in which I was abused or neglected. But I trust and believe if my pastor had ever heard of or seen signs of child abuse or neglect, that he would have the common sense to immediately report these signs to authorities. However, this is obviously not the case for everyone. I imagine what it would be like if I had been in a horrible situation where I was under those conditions. What if my pastor wasn't so trustworthy? What if he instead brushed it off or even outright ignored the signs, not caring how it affected me? What if he even used this information to take advantage of me? This is unfortunately a reality for children in Washington, where they're stuck in an awful situation that they could easily be freed out of with the passage of this bill. It is egregious and frankly disgusting that grown adults, people that have influence over these kids' lives, and people that kids trust and look up to, have an option to actively let abuse and neglect occur, affecting not only the kids' daily lives, but also how they live out the rest of their days. Although requiring members of the church to report such things does partially regulate the church, which is, in my opinion, never ideal, I believe that there is a time and a place in which it is critically necessary for the government to intervene and make sure our citizens are safe, especially when it comes to the safety of our children. Leaving this up to the churches, letting child abuse or neglect happen right under their noses is appalling. This is an incredibly obvious flaw that for such a progressive state as ours, it is shameful that we have not taken action on this. Without the passage of this bill, we are actively hurting future Washingtonians' lives and therefore the future of our state. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, representatives. My name is Lily Chung, and I'm a senior at Lake Washington High School. I'm here to testify for the House Bill 1211, focusing on members of the clergy becoming mandatory reporters within Washington state churches. My family has fallen victim to the lack of mandatory reporters within the church, and I stand before you all not only to represent the strength of my family, but also the truth of what happens within a church when abuse is not reported. My grandfather grew up in a Catholic church, yet his heart for religion was quickly soured by his priest's inaction, leaving him and his sister to continue to suffer abuse. My grandfather walked in on his father sexually abusing his sister. When he confided in his priest, someone he felt safe with, his priest did nothing. This allowed the abuse to continue within the home, not only with his sister, but also other members in the family. When my grandfather mustered up the courage to confront his father pulled a gun on him and told him to leave. Later, he found his father's lifeless body in the backyard shed. He had no choice but to run off to the military, where he became a drug and alcohol abuser at the age of 14. Unfortunately, the incest continued through other people in my family, and now there are many members of my family I will never speak to again. If the priest was a mandatory reporter, my grandfather wouldn't have had to suffer the consequences of lack of action by his priest. If the priest was a mandatory reporter, my grandfather would have known what to do when my mom told him what was happening to her within the home. If the priest was a mandatory reporter, perhaps my great-grandfather wouldn't have killed himself. Abuse does not end at one person. It sets a standard within a family, normalizing dangerous behaviors. Abuse is a cycle that each generation will have to face, but with mandatory reporters within Washington state churches, the cycle can be put to an end. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for our panel? Thanks for coming down today. Thank you. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. We would now like to ask Ryu Hoshino, Michelle Sung, and Gavin Callahan to please come up to the desk. Welcome, and whoever would like to get started, please go ahead.
Hello, committee members. My name is Ryu Hoshino, and I am a senior at Lake Washington High School. Today, I would like to discuss the importance of a bill like House Bill 1211 and the significant impact it can have on the past, current, and future victims of child abuse and neglect in religious institutions in the state of Washington. I'm sure you guys may know Amendment 4, Article 1, Section 11 of the Washington State Constitution guarantees a person absolute freedom of conscience in all matters of religious sentiment, belief, and worship. However, it does mention that liberty of conscience hereby secured shall not be so construed as to excuse acts of licentiousness or justify practices inconsistent with the peace and safety of the state. Washington State is one of only 5 states in the United States that do not require clergy to report suspected child abuse or neglect, which allows child abusers and child rapists to essentially get away with their crimes as confessions to priests are not covered under mandatory reporting. Many studies show that access to these mandatory reporters, whether it's to law enforcement, teachers, or healthcare providers, can significantly increase the conviction rates of child abusers that otherwise would not have been caught. I understand that the difficulty to introduce a bill like this, and I understand that the difficulty to introduce a bill like this that tests the sanctity of a religious institution and how it may raise concerns about such an essential right like the freedom of religion. Asking the priests and bishops and religious leaders of our state to break the seal of confession does seem like a grand task, but I believe it is absolutely necessary to ensure the safety of children in these religious institutions. It sickens me to think of the abusers that got off scot-free or the children that were unable to get the help they needed because of the lack of legislation that allowed reports of abuse to be hidden from the proper authorities. I urge the committee to support this bill to help protect the abused children now and prevent abused children in the future. Thank you.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Hello, community members. My name is Michelle Sung, and I am a student at Lake Washington High School, and I am here to share my testimony in support of the House Bill 1211. The National Children's Alliance states that 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 13 boys in the U.S. are estimated to experience child abuse, and more than 550,000 children are known to U.S. authorities to be abused. I can only imagine in horror just how many more children are being abused but not be able to get the help they need and they deserve because their trusted adult is not required to report it to the U.S. authorities. The Child Welfare Outcome Report says in 2020, Washington had 102,642 total referrals for child abuse and neglect. 41,795 were referred for investigation, 57% being 0 to 7 years old, 37% being 8 to 15 years old, and 6% being 16 to 17 years old. More than half of these demographics haven't even reached puberty yet, and some may not understand the concept of abuse. I as well come from a religious background and understand the importance of practicing sacred religious beliefs. However, it is not a sin to help and protect the well-being of our children, the future of our generations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hello, committee members, and thank you for hearing my testimony today. My name is Gavin Callahan, and I'm a senior at Lake Washington High School. I'm testifying in support of House Bill 1211, making it mandatory for clergies or religious leaders to report cases of child abuse or neglect. I understand that a bill regarding this topic has been introduced in the past with Senate Bill 6298 in last year's session. This bill argued that clergies be classified as mandatory reporters when informed of any case of child abuse or neglect. This bill however, died in committee. The reasoning for this is reporting a confession currently goes against the clergy penitent privilege. As you know, one goal of many religious establishments is to have someone who you can talk to judgment or consequence free. While this is a great system for individuals going through hardship, any form of child abuse is absolutely unacceptable. Many states, Democratic and Republican alike, have already taken action to further protect children within their respective states. In many U.S. states, clergy penitent privilege does not apply in case of child abuse or neglect. All these states prioritize child safety over the typical confidentiality protections provided to clergies, and Washington State needs to follow suit. It should be the goal of both state and church to create the safest environment for children possible. By protecting victims of child abuse and ensuring that any abusers are properly dealt with, we can better protect our state's children. This should not be a political issue or a debate between state and church, but an issue regarding the welfare of our children. Bill 1211 patches the holes in our current legislation in order to provide a better and brighter future for victims of abuse. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you. Any questions for this panel? Appreciate you coming down today. Thanks. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we'd like to invite Kirsten Larson and Rachel Fisher up to the desk, please. And whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Good afternoon. My name is Kirsten Larson. I'm here with the Clergy Accountability Coalition. I was also raised as one of Jehovah's Witnesses, and the other half of my family is Catholic. I'm here in support of House Bill 1211. I want to point out, first of all, that this is not only a Catholic issue. The confessional exception that the church is asking for enables abuse in other religious communities because of the precedent that's been set. Any internal investigation can be claimed as confession equivalent. This creates a loophole that's used to avoid reporting abuse. In the case of Jehovah's Witnesses, their policies require that elders report allegations of abuse directly to their organization headquarters and conduct their own investigations, keeping records from authorities. Their two-person rule requires that an additional witness to the abuse is found before it's considered credible, and victims are subjected to judicial committees led by elders where they're questioned in an attempt to get to the truth of an accusation. Many times, the victims are not believed and even at risk of being excommunicated from the religious community, while the abuser faces no consequences. Ongoing cases across the country prove that this is still a problem. It's not something that's happening in the past. There's a case in Pennsylvania right now where just recently someone was charged with abusing an autistic woman. It's led to investigations of at least 9 other elders that have been hiding abuse in that area. Also, just as recently as last year, a priest was found guilty of soliciting sex from inside the confessional. All of this just goes to show that as long as policies can be adjusted to require that investigations must be kept secret as a part of privilege, then they'll never have to be reported, allowing the cycle of abuse to continue.
Thank you.
It's time for Washington State to protect children over pedophiles and follow the lead of other states. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Chair Birdquist and members of the committee. My name is Rachel Fisher. I speak in support of Bill 1211. I'm a fourth-generation Jehovah's Witness and a CSA survivor. Under those policies, I've both seen and experienced firsthand the harm caused when religious institutions prioritize secrecy over justice. My grandmother's husband, Ernie Fine, abused his daughters, but instead of reporting crimes to secular authorities, the Jehovah's Witness leadership and his local elders concealed them under internal procedures. The silence emboldened him for decades, and just last year he was convicted and sentenced for multiple child sex abuse crimes in Maine. He was a multi-state offender. The history of Jehovah's Witnesses show they only change their behavior when forced to by law. This bill doesn't infringe on religious freedom. It simply ensures that no one is above the law when it comes to safeguarding children. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you being here today. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next, we're going to have Cristiana De Leon and Melanie Sakota. Please come up to the desk. And while they're coming up, if we could please have Robert Fontana and Lori Fontana up and ready to go virtual. Yep. Oh, looks like Christiana's online. Go ahead, Christiana.
Hi, yeah, thank you. And yes, due to the weather, I had to pivot to being online today. But hi, everybody. My name is Cristiana De Leon. I live in Black Diamond, Washington, and I am a board member for the Association of Secular Elected Officials. I stand before you today virtually again to testify in favor of this bill. As so many survivors have already come forth and said, already this has been years and years in the making, and it's long past overdue that we finally pass this bill. And also with the current provisions that are saying that there is no excuse and no place where child abuse can hide. You've already heard some really powerful testimony today already about this. And what I'm going to be adding in addition is how we have also just had a committee discussion about potentially adding more child care centers into church spaces, which really does ask the question, if there's a childcare desert, how are we going to make sure that these children continue to be safe in all of these places where there are potentially times when the clergy will be interacting with them? That's one additional piece. And the other thing that I want to really emphasize as well is the importance of the separation of church and state argument as well. There are numerous states that have shown that this can indeed be constitutional. And if there is a religious institution that is gearing up for a constitutional fight over this, I hope that we can show for the record that this is therefore not about actually protecting children. It's about protecting someone's bottom line and about the power structures that exist. Furthermore, I'll just add as well that there was also another case where the state does not have to intervene when there is something that was breaking canon law. There was a case recently where there was a priest who was engaging in very consensual activities, but through Grindr, who was then later defrocked and removed from clergy. That is not an issue for the state. And if the clergy member wanted to sue Grindr, that's why it's in the news. But in terms of that, it was consenting adults. We don't have any provision over that. What we're caring about is minors who are going to be impacted, who have no power over the kinds of bills that we're talking about today. Please pass this bill so that we make sure that we have a ripple effect that no longer ends in generational trauma. Let's build ourselves to be better. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we have Robert Fontana. Robert, whenever you're ready, please unmute and go ahead.
Good afternoon. Thank you for allowing me to be here, Mr. Chair and committee members. I represent Clergy Accountability Coalition. My name is Robert Fontana. I am an active Catholic who still goes to confession as needed. In 2003, while working for the Diocese of Yakima, I learned that a man whom I was helping prepare for ordination to the diaconate had molested his two nieces, one 10 years old. I escorted that man to the police station, but on returning to my office, I could not persuade the bishop to do an internal investigation to determine if this man had molested altar servers that he trained. The man told me that he had told only one other person, the parish priest in confession. The priest did nothing to keep this man from becoming a deacon. Had the man's nieces not told their mothers, he would be a deacon today. I challenged other cases, a priest in possession of child pornography, a deacon who raped a teenage boy, a priest who sexually assaulted a teenage girl. All these cases happened after 2003. The seal of confession has been misused to protect sexual predators. While confidentiality in confession is appropriate for the vast majority of sins shared with the priest, the abuse of a child, youth, or vulnerable adult is not one of them. I urge you to pass House Bill 1211. Thank you.
Appreciate it. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we have Laurie Fontana, and if we could please bring in Reverend James Connell into the Zoom room. Laurie, whenever you're ready, please unmute and go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and committee members. For the record, I am Laurie Fontana. I support House Bill 1211. We are active Catholics. We have 6 children, 7 grandchildren. I taught in both Catholic and public elementary schools. For over 20 years, my husband and I have challenged our church to end the cover-up of sex abuse of children and youth. History is clear. The only protective changes made by church leadership have happened because survivors spoke up via media and they brought lawsuits, because whistleblowers exposed abuse and cover-up, and because the state stepped in with legal reforms. To the objection of breaking the seal of confession, this is a man-made church discipline, not even church binding until the 13th century. It has protected secrecy and cover-up. As with many other church rules over the years, it can be changed. I love my Catholic faith community. I want it to be a safe place for children. HB 1211 provides an important layer of protection for our children. Please vote yes. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate your time. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we have Reverend Connell, and if we could please have on deck Mitch Mullane. Reverend, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Hello, good afternoon, and thank you for allowing me to speak. I am Father James Connell. I am a Catholic priest of the Archdiocese of Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It should be noted that I am speaking as an individual person and not as an official representative of the Catholic Church. I strongly support House Bill 1211 because no law that hides or protects criminals should be justified or considered a good law when that protecting the criminals simultaneously endangers children or vulnerable adults. There are teachings in the Catechism of the Catholic Church that support my position. I especially note today paragraph 2266, which says in part, safeguarding the common good, legitimate public authority has the right and the duty to inflict punishment proportionate to the gravity of the offense. Hence, criminals must be held accountable for their crimes and pay their debts to society. But first, the police and the criminal justice system must know about the crime, and hiding and protecting criminals does not serve this end. There are other teachings in the Catechism concerning truth, reparation, and the common good that could be cited. So in my opinion, no valid freedom of religion argument rooted in the absence of truth and justice can provide moral justification for sheltering perpetrators of abuse or neglect of children. Finally, I would like to mention that, to the best of my knowledge, doctors and other medical personnel are mandatory reporters in all or at least most of the 50 states, but without any type of an exclusion privilege that we have concerning the priests. And yet I know of no people who don't go to their doctor because the doctor is a mandatory reporter. If they've done nothing wrong, they have nothing to worry about. And the same would be true for people going to confession over confidential conversations with clergy. They would have nothing to worry about. Thank you for allowing me to speak.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we have Mitch Moline. And if you could please have Ryan Dudley on deck ready to go. Mitch, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Hello, my name is Mitch Moline. I am here to urge you to pass HB 1211 without exemption. Over the past few days, House Republicans and Christian conservative policy groups have been very proud of a retweet by President Donald Trump. This was made by Representative Walsh. He was very proud of getting retweeted by Ted Cruz and President Trump. This was regarding another amendment that failed that had to do with school employees reporting child abuse. In part, Walsh said, the Washington Democrats' position shielding, even for a few days, school employees who rape or sexually abuse children in their care is insane, indefensible. And yet, imagine the total hypocrisy of groups like the Christian FPIW and the Washington GOP legislators who reshared that post, crying outrage over schools having 48 hours to report abuse, and then unapologetically asking their supporters to oppose making clergy mandatory reporters. When it comes to their church, they seem to lose the outrage, even though churches not only don't have a 48-hour time limit, legally they never have to report child abuse they are aware of. So I'd like to use Jim Walsh's words. Shielding churches and clergy who learn about the rape and sexual abuse of children in their care is insane. It's indefensible. I would ask you to please take note of those who are most likely paid to be here today versus the overwhelming show of those who are here today for the sake of doing the right thing. The Catholic Church's lobbyists who are here today either ignorantly or callously disregard the way these laws with exemptions allow other faith communities to shield predators and fail victims and frame this as only a historical issue. That's offensive. There are predators who are known by clergy today who are being shielded. The Catholic Church is not the only religious organization that is morally bankrupt on this issue. They're just the richest and the loudest. Please enact this law.
Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Now we have Ryan Dudley. And if we could please have Melissa Navarez on deck. Ryan, whenever you're ready, please unmute and go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair and members of the committee. Thank you for allowing me the opportunity to speak today. My name is Ryan Dudley, and I am the State Policy Manager with the FFRF Action Fund, the advocacy arm of the Freedom from Religion Foundation. I'm here today on behalf of our more than 1,800 members throughout the state of Washington to voice our strong support for House Bill 1211. From the outset, I want to make one thing very clear. This bill is not about attacking religious freedoms. This bill is about valuing and honoring survivors of abuse while being a voice for them when they need it the most. The seal of confession must never bar justice for survivors of abuse. Churches already impede investigations citing their religious character. Without this common sense bill, survivors will continue to be left in the dark. As you have likely heard, the Seattle Archdiocese voluntarily provided the names of current and former priests that are determined to have been credibly accused of sexual abuse. These claims have been evaluated only by the church itself, not by law enforcement and not by justice officials. When attorneys general from other states have conducted their own investigations, they have found dramatically greater numbers of credible allegations than what the church has initially reported. For example, a 2023 report from the Illinois Attorney General's office listed 4 times as many substantiated child sex abusers than the Diocese of Illinois had previously disclosed. Independent investigations like this one initiated in Illinois, as well as the investigation initiated by the Attorney General in Washington, are vital to holding churches and members of the clergy accountable. Closing the so-called confessional loophole will go a long way toward ensuring that these investigations are afforded full transparency.
Thank you.
Thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we would like to invite Andrew Fox into the Zoom room. And if we could please have Sarah Young on deck. And Andrew, whenever you're ready, please unmute and go ahead.
Good afternoon, committee members. Thank you so much for your time and attention to this matter. My name is Andrew Fox. I'm a formerly served as an elder in the Christian Congregation of Jehovah's Witnesses, and I am here in favor of this bill. I am a 4th generation Jehovah's Witness and served as an elder for over 15 years before stepping aside due to child abuse reporting issues. In California, there's a law that it includes an exemption for confessions, and this exemption is problematic. It allows elders to hide abuse under the penitent privilege. See, Jehovah's Witnesses, we don't have a formal confession process. Instead, elders are elders 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Any conversation that is had between an elder and a congregant can be considered part of that penitent privilege. And so often, reporting of these things is not does not happen, and especially when the abuser is either an elder or a relative, which is often the case. During my years as an elder, I became aware of at least 31 different instances of child abuse that should have been reported. Only one of them was, and that case led to an arrest. The rest went unreported. In the official textbook for elders entitled Shepherd the Flock in chapter 14, it directs elders before they do anything to call their legal department and get direction from them as to how they should handle the situation. That's unacceptable.
Thank you.
Should read, they need to call the authorities. With us in a state of Washington with a population of 8 million people, there are so many people that need protection from this bill. I encourage you and urge you, please, to pass this law in Washington without exemption, because
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we have Sarah Young, and if you could please have Teresa Schremp on deck. Sarah, whenever you're ready, please go ahead and unmute and go ahead and get started.
Hi, thank you guys for your time. I first want to say something really dangerous was implied earlier by Jean Hill and Bishop Schuster, implying that child abuse is essentially something of the past. We're not going to do that. They are on the payroll from the Catholic Church. They stand to benefit a lot, and the church does as well, protecting pedophiles and not children. So we do need to level set that. I grew up in the Organization of Jehovah's Witnesses, and in the state of California, we have this bill with exemption, and a surprise to no one, it doesn't work. It's a loophole. It is not a protection. It is a loophole. It is a vague sense of security that we are being protected when we are not. Out of numerous reports of child abuse that I personally made to my elder body thinking I would get help, only one was reported, and it resulted in an arrest. And as a surprise to no one, again, I got help and the abuse stopped. But the important part is it was only reported because they deemed that person was not part of the congregation. So they will continue to protect predators within the organization using this loophole. So it's a very clear line. You either protect predators or you protect children. There is no in between, and there needs to be no exemptions. So I urge you to pass this bill without exemption and protect the children in your state in the way that California has not.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we have Teresa Schremp, and if we could please have Eric Niffin on deck. Teresa, whenever you're ready, please unmute and go ahead.
Thank you. My name is Teresa Schremp. I'm a retired attorney and live in Seattle. I oppose this amendment to the extent that it would require a Catholic priest to disclose statements made to him during the course of sacramental confession. I have no objection. In fact, I would support a disclosure requirement if the priest learns of child abuse while acting as a teacher or counselor or in any other context except during confession. A sacramental confession in the Catholic Church is no small, trivial matter. A priest who breaks the seal of confession is automatically excommunicated. So what is the purpose of this privilege? In 1980, the United States Supreme Court stated that the purpose of the privilege is the human need to disclose to a spiritual counselor in total and absolute confidence flawed acts or thoughts and to receive priestly consolation and guidance in return. The state of Washington recognizes a number of other privileges, including the attorney-client privilege, one I'm familiar with. So why doesn't the bill make attorneys mandatory reporters? I'd be willing to wager that as much or more evidence of child abuse and neglect has been disclosed to criminal defense attorneys than to Catholic priests. The reason for the attorney-client privilege is that our criminal justice system cannot function fairly if an attorney is forced or allowed to disclose confidences. In the case of Miranda versus Arizona, the Supreme Court 60 years ago allowed a brutal killer to go free because he had not been advised of his constitutional right to remain silent prior to police interrogation and his confession. The result, though unpopular at the time, maybe it's unpopular today, was necessary in order
Thank you.
to secure the constitutional rights of the accused. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we have Eric Niffin, and if we could please have Tony Napoli Roy on deck. And Eric, whenever you're ready, please go ahead.
Thank you. Good afternoon. My name is Eric Niffin. I'm a fellow with the Ethics and Public Policy Center, a think tank in Washington, D.C. I'm also a civil rights attorney. For the past 3 years, I've been monitoring Washington's efforts to make clergy mandatory reporters. This is a good goal, endorsed by Washington's 3 Catholic dioceses, each of which already requires priests to report suspected child abuse and neglect. But it won't do any good for Washington to pass a bill with obvious constitutional problems. 2 years ago, I warned that substitute House Bill 1098, were it enacted, would make Washington State's mandatory reporter law the most radical in the country. Setting the state up for a civil rights lawsuit, I am confident it would lose. The same is true of this year's HB 1211. First, the bill incorrectly assumes that the clergy penitent privilege hurts children. No grand jury report has ever recommended invading this privilege as a way to keep kids safe. Second, HB 1211 discriminates against religion. The bill would make it official state policy that it's good for lawyers to keep confessions confidential for secular reasons, but it's bad for priests to keep confessions secret for religious reasons. It's hard to think of a more blatantly unconstitutional policy. Attempting to invade the clergy penitent privilege is unwise, unnecessary, and unconstitutional. Washington should instead follow the approach that other states have taken, like Hawaii did in 2020. As in previous years, I would be happy to work together with anyone on the committee to develop a better bill that would protect children, protect people from some of the abuses within the Jehovah's Witness community, and respect constitutional rights. Thank you.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left and 5 people wishing to testify. So if we can save any questions, we'll go to Representative Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Tony, whenever you're ready, please unmute and go ahead. And if we could please have Alex Ashley on deck. Go ahead, Tony.
1 minute per person. Thank you.
Tony, if you can hear us, please unmute and go ahead.
My name is Tony Napoli Roy. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. I am a lifelong Catholic. I'm still a practicing Catholic. I know many, many priests. In my many days of living, I have been even held positions with the Catholic Church, the Archdiocese Women's Commission. I'm also a licensed mental health counselor, having worked in this profession for 40 years. Therefore, I am a mandated reporter and have reported many times to the authorities. I firmly support House Bill 1211 because I do not believe that priests should be abstained from reporting on child abuse, whether it's in the confessional or out of the confessional. I believe that nobody should, maybe even not the lawyers who have testified today.
Thank you.
I have in my career run sexual abuse groups for survivors, counseled many survivors. I know the agony and the trauma that they go through. Therefore, in my experience, in my faith, in my whole life, I totally support House Bill 1211. Thank you.
Thank you, Tony. Appreciate that. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we have Alex Ashley. And if you could please have Terrence Carroll on deck. Alex, please unmute and go ahead. You have 1 minute.
Mr. Chair, members of the committee, good afternoon. My name is Alex Ashley. I'm from Seattle. And as a former volunteer minister, as well as a former journalist, I'd like to voice my strong support for this bill. It reminds me of a saying that a friend of mine had years ago, which is, if you keep doing what you're doing, you keep getting what you've got. And the reason I bring that up is because year after year, and I cannot make sense of it, our representatives have kicked the tires of legislation designed to protect children like they're buying a used car. And the complete lack of urgency with which they've approached this issue, it has been a horror show to behold over the past several years. And then I can set my watch every year to the Catholic Church wandering in with their dog and pony show and their hand wringing, and then pulling out a big fat pocketbook and paying off lobbyists and lawyers to keep the status quo. So I'll just say this, please fix this. We've had this conversation so many times. Stop obstructing, close
Thank
the
you.
wound that's been festering for decades, and please take action to protect children in the state
Thank
of
you.
Washington.
Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we have Terrence Carroll. And if you could please have Colleen Kiernick ready. Terrence, whenever you're ready, please unmute and go ahead. You have 1 minute. Terrence, please unmute and go ahead and get started.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Yes, thank you for the opportunity. And I've been hoping to have a conversation with you. My name is Terrence Carroll. I'm here on behalf of Heal Our Church. My background is that of a retired judge, as well as part of a group, healourchurch.org, which has sought transparency and accountability within the church for many years. I think what you're hearing, what the last speaker just said, is really pertinent here. I want to change what I was going to tell you to the extent that it's really important that you appreciate that this downplaying by the church and its officials is constant. It's what we faced with Heal Our Church. It's what continues to obstruct, and would urge you as best you can to move ahead. The arguments by the lawyers are based on what their perception is of the Constitution. The Constitution, Article 1, Section 11, has been part of our Constitution since the beginning and absolutely is prescient on this issue in anticipating these very concerns. This is an issue about children. It's not about the Catholic Church. Urge you to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you. Vice Chair Cortez.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Next up, we have Colleen Kiernick, and our last as far week, Clark Kimner. Colleen, please unmute and go ahead. Colleen, if you could hear us, please unmute and go ahead.
It just came up. Thank you. Can you hear me now?
Yes, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I'll be quick in my 1 minute. I'm a lifelong Catholic and I'm a co-founder of Heal Our Church. Let me do what I've done for years as a lawyer and respond to some of the most significant misstatements that were shared with the committee by those who are opposed to this bill. First of all, in response to the questions from a committee member, please understand that the Attorney General's lawsuit against the Catholic Archdiocese did not seek solely receipts for monies paid in settlements. It was a comprehensive request for all the records which contain a history of the tragedy of child abuse by priests and the efforts to hide that. That case is on appeal. It has not been won. It'll be presented to the Court of Appeals for a final decision. Next, there was also a series of questions regarding activities in Spokane. I had a direct involvement in the Spokane bankruptcy. Let me reassure you that there were many victims who came forward who are what I would call newer, younger victims. This is not a problem that's in the past. With respect to those who have asserted the state and federal constitution as a means of defeating this bill, let's be clear, the founding fathers recognized the need to balance competing constitutional rights and to afford proper protections only where there was no harm done to an innocent party.
Thank you, Colleen.
Thank you.
Last testifier, Vice Chair Cortez.
Clark, go ahead and unmute and go ahead. You have 1 minute.
Hello, my name is Clark Kimmer. I'm a member of Heal Our Church, lifelong member of Our Lady of the Lake Parish, and had a career with 31 years in the Seattle Police Department, the last 16 of those as second in command of the department as assistant chief. You know, every police officer has to swear an oath to protect and defend the Constitution of the United States, of the state of Washington, and all the appropriate laws therein. And that means we are defenders of rights. One of those rights is the freedom of worship. but the other rights are not precluded, preempted, or diminished by that right. Indeed, the right of equal justice under the law is what I've dedicated my life to, and is difficult to achieve when we have obstructive protections for the disclosure of just basic information on behalf of the most vulnerable people. I'm a proud mandatory reporter. It boggles my mind that that value isn't shared by my church that I love. So please support this bill. It'll make the investigation of these difficult crimes much, much better on behalf of the survivors and the victims.
Thank you. Thanks for everybody testifying today. With that, that'll close the hearing on House Bill 1211. And with all the hearings being completed, we are adjourned.